You know, it's funny. When a Formula One car pulls into the pit lane, right, and it's just completely engulfed in smoke, the engineers don't just like throw up their hands, look at the engine block, and say, well, the car is broken.
Right, they'd never do that.
No, exactly. They plug into the telemetry. They look at thousands of these microscopic data points to find the exact valve, the precise carbon fiber strut that just snapped under pressure.
Yeah, they need to know exactly what failed.
Right. We expect that absolute level of precision with high-performance machines. But when it comes to the human body, I mean, even the most elite human bodies on the entire planet, we often just sort of settle for the headline.
We really do. We gravitate toward a simple diagnosis because, well, it's comforting. It puts this highly volatile, infinitely complex biological system into a neat little box that we can easily digest.
A neat little box.
Yeah.
And I mean, that desire for a simple answer brings us perfectly to the breaking news of exactly today, June 29, 2026.
Yeah, the swimming world is buzzing today.
It really is. If you follow sports, you probably already know what just happened. We are at the French Championships in Saint-Étienne. It's the 200-meter breaststroke. And Léon Marchand, the swimming phenomenon, the guy who literally just 2 days ago won the 400-meter individual medley with the best time in the world this year, he abruptly pulls out.
Just right in the middle of his morning heat.
Yeah.
I mean, he was leading the pack, looking completely dominant, and then he miserably just suddenly slowed down. He ultimately finished with the 9th fastest time.
Right. And the crazy part is, because another swimmer, Carl Leitkoczy, actually withdrew, a spot technically opened up in the final for Marchand anyway.
Oh, wow, right.
Yeah, so he could have pushed through and swam in the final, but he chose to withdraw entirely, and the official reason that was handed out to the press, an adductor injury.
Which, on the surface, that sounds completely standard for a breaststroke swimmer.
It does, right.
Yeah, you hear the word breaststroke and you hear adductor, and the medical brain just kind of nods along. It makes perfect statistical sense.
But what we are going to do today for you is look way past that headline. We're going to dive into the physiological telemetry, so to speak.
Exactly.
We are going to deconstruct this injury based on some incredibly detailed clinical analysis from our sources to see what's actually happening under the surface.
Yeah, we're going on a bit of a medical detective journey today.
We are. And to guide us, we actually have a very specific, really fascinating philosophy for today's deep dive.
We do. There is a phrase from the clinical breakdown of this event that essentially serves as our anchor for today. So, in French, the medical analysts state, and I love this, they say, on ne parle surtout pas d'erreur diagnostique, mais d'alternative diagnostique.
Meaning, for those of us who don't speak French, we absolutely don't talk about a diagnostic error, but a diagnostic alternative.
Precisely. I mean, in elite sports medicine, particularly when doctors are making these split-second assessments poolside right after a race, they aren't really making errors in the traditional sense of the word.
Right. They aren't just guessing wildly.
No, not at all. They are dealing with a biological system that is being pushed to such extreme, totally unprecedented limits that the standard rules of anatomy just start to blur. So what looks like one common injury is often something much rarer, much more complex, that's just hiding right underneath.
Hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. So we are looking for that diagnostic alternative today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the alternative, we first have to fully understand the official story, right?
Yeah.
We need to look at the usual suspect.
Doctors.
Yeah, why do adductors tear in the first place? Let's do a little anatomy 101 for a second. Think of your pelvis as the heavy chassis of that Formula One car we talked about. The adductors are essentially the heavy-duty suspension cables that are keeping everything aligned on your inner thigh.
That chassis imagery is actually really helpful, especially because it's a heavily reinforced area. I mean, it's not just a single muscle down there.
Right.
The anatomical data outlines a group of 5 distinct muscles on that inner thigh. You've got the pectineus, the adductor brevis, the adductor longus, the adductor magnus, which is the absolute largest and most exposed one, and the gracilis.
And their main job, I mean, as the name adductor implies, is adduction. Meaning, if you are standing with your legs spread wide, these are the exact muscles that violently pull your legs back together toward the midline of your body.
They do that, yeah, but they also act as these crucial stabilizers for the pelvis whenever you run or walk.
Oh, right.
And they assist with hip flexion and rotation. They essentially operate in this massive kinetic chain alongside your quads and glutes to produce raw power.
And that insatiable need for raw power is exactly why this muscle group is under constant threat in the water, especially, when you're swimming the breaststroke.
Absolutely.
Let's look at the biomechanics of that famous frog kick, because it is a highly unnatural movement for the human hip joint, especially when you're repeating it thousands of times a week.
Yeah, the clinical data breaks the cycle of that kick down into very distinct phases. So first, it requires a complete sequence of flexion, which is bringing the knees up, followed by abduction, which is spreading the legs wide open.
Okay.
And then external rotation, which is turning the feet outward to basically catch the water.
So you're winding up the spring, you're stretching those inner thigh muscles out as far as they can possibly go.
Exactly. Then comes the explosive release, extension and adduction. You are snapping your legs completely straight and just slam them together to squeeze the water and propel your body forward.
Sounds painful when you put it like that.
It's intense.
Yeah.
The absolute peak stress on those 5 inner thigh muscles happens right there during that propulsive snap,
Right.
and also during the forced recovery phase when you have to quickly drag your legs back up against the heavy resistance of the water.
Right. And the constant repetitive wear and tear of that snapping motion, it usually leads to chronic overload. You see a lot of what the medical field calls insertion tendinopathies. And if you're wondering what that actually feels like, think of the tendon as a thick rope anchoring the muscle to the pubic bone. With constant explosive pulling, the fibers of that rope literally start to micro tear and fray right where they glue to the bone.
Yeah, and it creates severe inflammation. Another really common outcome is swimmer's pubalgia, or osteitis pubis.
That sounds awful.
It is. The pubic symphysis is this cartilage joint that connects the 2 halves of your pelvis at the front. The sheer, repetitive pulling forces from the adductors essentially inflame that entire joint and all the surrounding bone, causing this really deep bilateral groin pain.
But it's a progressive thing, right? Like you feel a dull ache warming up, it gets a little sharper during a hard set, and it just sort of builds into a chronic issue over months of training.
Exactly. It is the defining occupational hazard for breaststrokers. Muscle imbalances, excessive training loads, or even just natural hypermobility in the hips, they all contribute to this slow-building deterioration.
Okay, but see, I'm looking at the timeline of events from the race today, and this is where that official narrative just doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah.
Marchand didn't casually complain about some lingering soreness after a Tuesday morning practice. He was in the middle of a championship race. He was leading his heat, and then he stopped suddenly.
Right.
The medical reports from our sources describe it as an acute sudden pain, a literal dagger in the muscle. A chronic, slow-building overuse injury just doesn't stop a world record holder dead in his tracks like a dagger.
No, it really doesn't. And that exact observation is what didn't sit right with the medical analyst either.
Right.
A sudden dagger-like pain suggests an acute tear or a massive mechanical failure, not just a cranky, inflamed tendon. So to figure out what actually happened, the clinical team had to stop looking at standard breaststroke mechanics and start looking at what makes Léon Marchand's specific technique a once-in-a-generation anomaly.
It's not just how he swims on the surface of the water, is it? The secret lies in what he does underneath it.
Yes, the dolphin kick.
The dolphin kick. Because after every single turn, Marchand performs these incredibly deep, intensely powerful underwater undulations. He is famous for them, right? They are his biggest competitive advantage.
Oh, without a doubt.
But the biomechanical breakdown of this technique reveals that it creates an absolute nightmare scenario for his groin.
It really does.
Yeah.
The medical literature refers to this as a double constraint. So it's a double antagonistic stress on the exact same anatomical region.
Okay, break that down for us.
Let's combine what we just discussed. In the regular breaststroke kick on the surface, he is performing that explosive, wide adduction. He's stretching the muscle to the absolute end of its range of motion and firing it like a rubber band.
Okay, so he does it on the surface, but then he hits the wall, he turns, and he goes completely submerged for the dolphin kick.
Right.
And during those deep whole-body oscillations, his legs aren't wide open. He has to keep his legs squeezed perfectly, tightly together against the massive resistance of the water.
Exactly. To maintain that tight streamline while essentially whipping his entire body, his adductors are locked in a forced, repeated isometric contraction.
An isometric contraction. Okay, if you're trying to visualize what an isometric contraction actually feels like in this context, imagine you are trying to forcefully slam a heavy, solid oak door shut with your arm.
Okay, I like this.
That swinging, snapping motion is the breaststroke kick. Now imagine a hurricane is trying to blow that exact same door wide open, and you are using your arm to hold the door perfectly still against the wind.
Wow.
You aren't moving the door at all, but your muscles are just screaming from holding it rigidly in place. That is the isometric contraction of the dolphin kick.
Now imagine alternating between violently slamming the door and then rigidly holding it against the hurricane over and over again at literal world record speed.
The tension is astronomical. I mean, something in that hinge is going to snap.
It really is.
Yeah.
This specific combination, a high volume of traditional breaststroke snapping, combined with these exceptionally powerful, rigid underwater oscillations, it generates abnormal shear forces on that pubic symphysis joint we talked about earlier.
Right.
It is a mechanism of injury that is almost entirely absent from standard swimming medical literature, simply because, well, no one else in the history of the sport swims quite like he does.
He is literally operating outside the established parameters of sports medicine in a pool.
He really is.
Which perfectly brings us back to the core philosophy of our deep dive today. If the mechanism causing the extreme stress is so unprecedented, maybe the adductor isn't actually the victim here. Remember, it's not a diagnostic error, it's a diagnostic alternative.
Exactly. If we rule out the adductor as the primary culprit, we have to look at the surrounding anatomy to see what else is taking the brunt of that massive force. And the clinical analysis introduces the first major diagnostic alternative.
Which is?
The iliopsoas.
The primary hip flexor.
Yes, the psoas iliac. Think about the physical mechanics of that dolphin kick again. To generate that massive whole-body whip against the heavy density of the water, the primary muscle recruited to explosively pull the hip forward and flex it is the psoas.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this from a clinical perspective. We are talking about the medical team for the best swimmer on the planet. How does a highly trained medical professional mistake a hip flexor for an inner thigh muscle during an evaluation right after a race?
I mean, it sounds improbable, I know, but in a rapid poolside assessment, the clinical confusion is entirely logical.
Really?
Yeah, because these doctors are doing a physical examination with their hands, right? They aren't in a pristine MRI suite. Both the adductor and the iliopsoas are anchored in the exact same geographic region of the body.
Yeah.
When injured, both will cause intense radiating pain in the groin and the anterior thigh area.
So the pain map is practically identical on the surface.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Furthermore, look at the mechanics of the whip. That extreme dolphin kick doesn't just flex the hip forward. On the downstroke of the kick, it forces the hip backward into extension.
Right, the snap back.
And when the hip extends violently like that, the psoas has to act as an eccentric brake.
Let's explain that real quick. Eccentric braking is when a muscle is contracting and generating force, but it's simultaneously being lengthened.
Yes.
Like when you are doing a bicep curl and you slowly lower a heavy dumbbell back down rather than just letting it drop, your bicep is working incredibly hard, but the muscle is stretching out at the same time.
Exactly. The psoas is desperately trying to control the massive force of the downstroke while being stretched to its limit. But here's the catch.
Okay.
An isolated tear of the psoas from eccentric braking is almost never seen in competitive swimmers. So when the doctor touches the groin, asks where it hurts, and the swimmer points to that spot, the doctor's brain, which has been trained by thousands of previous breaststroke cases, relies on statistical probability and immediately says adductor.
Ah, I see.
They simply don't look for the psoas first, because it shouldn't mathematically be the psoas.
It's like the pit crew sees smoke from the engine block and immediately assumes it's the usual valve that always breaks, because 99 times out of 100 it is.
Precisely. But the clinical analysis goes even deeper than that.
Oh, it gets wilder.
It does. The psoas is a highly logical alternative, but there is an even rarer, even more precise culprit hiding in the data.
This is where the detective work gets amazing. Because the medical analysts argue that while the psoas fits the pain profile, there's another muscle that fits the exact dagger sensation perfectly.
Right.
But it is so incredibly rare in swimming, it's almost mythical. We are talking about the proximal rectus femoris, specifically its reflected head.
Yes, the droit anterior.
Yeah.
This is the point where we essentially cross from standard sports medicine into structural engineering.
Totally.
The rectus femoris is a major part of your quadriceps. It's the big muscle running right down the front of your thigh. But unlike the other quad muscles, it attaches way up high on the pelvis, and it has two attachment points, or heads.
Okay.
You have the direct head and the reflected head, which dives deep and inserts into the supraacetabular groove.
Let's visualize that groove for a second. If you picture your hip socket as a deep cup that your leg bone sits in, the supraacetabular groove is basically a little ridge right on the upper outside rim of that cup. That's where this reflected head anchors.
Perfect visualization. And tearing that specific anchor point, I mean, the medical literature explicitly states this is a sprinter's injury,
Wow.
or the injury of a football player who swings their leg with maximum velocity and completely whiffs the ball. It is an injury of sudden, explosive dry land impact. Tearing the reflected head is virtually never seen in a swimmer.
So how does a guy swimming in a pool suffer the injury of a sprinter bursting off the blocks on dry land? Let's visualize the exact moment of failure here. During that extreme dolphin kick underwater, Marchand is forcing his hip into extension. He is driving his entire leg backward.
Yes.
But simultaneously, to finish the whip-like motion of the kick, he is violently straightening or extending his knee.
And that's the killer combo right there. Because the rectus femoris is a two-joint muscle, meaning it crosses both the hip joint and the knee joint. When you extend the hip backwards and extend the knee straight at the exact same fraction of a second, you are stretching that muscle to its absolute maximum physical length.
And he's not just stretching it in a yoga class.
No.
He is doing it explosively against the heavy, unrelenting density of the water. It causes a violent traction, a vicious pulling force, right at that proximal insertion point on the rim of the hip socket.
It is the biomechanical equivalent of a sprinter bursting out of the starting blocks, but he is generating those terrestrial levels of force submerged in a fluid that is nearly 800 times denser than air.
That's insane.
If that reflected head tears or even partially avulses, which basically means the tendon actually pulls slightly away from the bone that is your dagger, that is the catastrophic structural failure that forces a world-class athlete to stop dead in the water.
Okay, so we have three completely different muscle groups on the table now. The adductor complex, the psoas hip flexor, and the rectus femoris quad muscle.
Yep.
How does a medical team ever accurately diagnose this?
This is where the concept of the diagnostic alternative reaches its absolute peak importance. To fully justify why this initial poolside diagnosis isn't a simple mistake, the medical analysts introduce us to the pubo-abdominofemoral complex.
It sounds intimidating, but it's actually incredibly intuitive when you visualize it. Picture a three-way tug-of-war happening right across the front of your pelvis.
Exactly. You have the thick abdominal muscles pulling upward on the pubic bone from the top. You have the heady adductor muscles pulling downward and inward from the bottom.
Okay.
And you have the rectus femoris pulling downward and forward from the front. They're all ripping at the exact same anatomical crossroads.
They all anchor in the same neighborhood. And because they share that exact same zone of conflict in the chaotic heat of competition, a tear in any one of these three areas presents identically.
The clinical presentation is identical. The athlete reports severe groin or lower abdominal pain. It flares up severely with effort. It throbs, but generally feels okay at complete rest.
Right.
And it produces that signature dagger-like sting that forces the athlete to immediately cease whatever movement they are doing.
So you literally can't just press your thumb into the athlete's leg, feel around, and confidently say, aha, I feel a tear on the reflected head of the rectus femoris.
It is medically impossible to untangle that structural knot using just palpation and basic range of motion tests. The clinical data is definitive on this. To find the actual injury, you need an MRI, and you need highly specific sequences.
Like what?
They specifically cite the need for ABER sequences, which stands for abduction and external rotation, to basically view the joint at extreme angles.
Okay. And they also highlight the necessity of Dixon MRI sequences, right?
Yes.
Because this is a really crucial detail. In a standard MRI, both human fat and liquid inflammation show up as bright white. So a tiny micro tear hiding in tissue can be completely masked by natural body fat. The Dixon sequence mathematically separates the fat from the water in the image. It basically turns the fat dark, so the only thing glowing brightly on the screen is the liquid edema, the actual swelling and bleeding from the hidden tear.
And that highly specialized imaging has to be centered perfectly on the hip and pubis. You obviously do not have an advanced MRI machine equipped with Dixon sequencing sitting next to the starting blocks in Saint-Étienne.
No, definitely not.
So the medical team evaluates a breaststroker with sudden groin pain, and they give the press the statistically correct, most logical answer, an adductor injury.
But underneath that simple headline, because of the unprecedented physics-defying mechanics of this specific athlete, the reality is likely a highly complex diagnostic alternative.
Exactly.
It's the psoas, or the rectus femoris, snapping under the immense pressure of that double constraint.
You know, we step back from the medical terminology for a second. This whole journey offers a really profound lesson on how we process information. The philosophy of the diagnostic alternative applies far beyond sports medicine.
It really does. It's about how we look at any complex system in crisis.
Precisely. I mean, whether you are troubleshooting a sudden catastrophic failure in a global software network, analyzing an inexplicable drop in a business's quarterly revenue, or even just trying to figure out a weird lingering medical symptom of your own.
Yeah.
The most obvious, statistically probable answer isn't always the correct one, especially when that system is operating under extreme, unique, or unprecedented stress. You have to be willing to look past the smoke. You have to ask, what is the alternative? What else could this be?
It really is a masterclass in not settling for the easy answer. And digging into the telemetry of this injury leaves me with a final, lingering thought for you to ponder. We just established that an elite swimmer like Léon Marchand might literally be suffering from the blunt force injuries of a dryland sprinter simply because his underwater technique is so unprecedentedly powerful.
Yeah, it's wild to think about.
If he is generating those kinds of terrestrial bone-pulling forces while submerged in water, are we no longer just testing the limits of athletic technique? Are we now fundamentally pushing against the structural evolutionary limits of human anatomy itself?
When the technique outpaces the biological engineering of the body, it really raises a massive question about the future of all elite sports.
Something to definitely chew on next time you watch a world record fall. We'll leave you to mull that one over. Until next time.